All right, thanks for joining us for part 3. We're talking about, in part 3, the idea of, in Genesis chapter 4 through 9, all the things that happen there. We're talking about the application to our lives, the application to culture of all the things that we looked at earlier in this lesson. When you look at Cain and Abel, what you see in Cain is you see him destroy his brother, not because he thought his brother was bad, but because he thought his brother was good. Now, when you think about that, what do you think of as far as, the ramifications of that? It's one thing to destroy somebody because you think they're evil or bad. But what are the differences? What are the additional costs or the different additional results of destroying somebody because you think they're good?
So, and you've had studies on this in the past and stuff, and you've talked about, if there's somebody who is a better father than you or something like that, there's always an inherent judgment that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
If I look, at my friend and say, wow, he's a better father, and I can be angry or upset about that, or I can learn from that, and he can kind of serve as kind of a local ideal, if you will, to show me how to be a better father. But I will have to be humble and accept the judgment that just inherently comes with it.
Yeah, and I think that's what you see in Cain and Abel is there's a very human tendency for us to look at somebody who's exceeds us in areas and to be jealous of that and to in our minds start to tear that down or to tear them down. And the problem with that you have is that if you start looking at all the things that are good, all the things that are successful, all the things that are glorious and are a blessing, and you start to run those things down in your mind, then you have nothing left to aim for except for things that are terrible. And I think that manifests itself in a couple different ways. The first thing that it manifests itself in is depression. People who just there is nothing in their life that's worth pursuing because everything's junk, right? Everything is not what it seems. Everything is really a farce. Everything is no good. And I think the second thing that happens is you lacking good things to pursue, you start pursuing bad things. And I think, when we talked about Columbine and the shooters at that tragedy, that's kind of what you see happen with them. As a youth pastor, there was a kid that really struggled in achievement and different things. And a few years later, I was talking to another former student, and he said, let me know that guy had become a vampire. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said he literally believes that he's a vampire, and he's embraced the pursuit of that, trying to live that life as much as he can. And I think that there's you can go down some pretty dark holes if that's the way that you go. Now, I don't think that most people go there. I think that most people, what they do is they end up in a situation known as sloth. And being one of the 7 deadly sins, sloth is not really so much laziness, although it often manifests itself that way. It's a sadness about what's good. And the problem that we have is that, where can we see most clearly the attributes of God? Where, what has God, we can look at a mountain and say that's beautiful, that's glorious. We can look at a sunset, but where do we look?
Obviously, we're His image bearers.
Yeah,
so.
we look at other people, and if in looking at other people, when they display, when they manifest these qualities that are godly, if our reaction to that is jealousy, is to turn away from that, then we will have a sadness about what's good. And I think that's the most common reaction is a sloth. It's a sadness about what's good. It's an inability to rouse ourselves to pursue what's good, because what we've done in our minds is we've lowered the value of those good things.
Is this more than just like a typical apathy in terms of calling it a sadness about what is good?
Well, it can be. I mean, there can be a lot of different reasons for laziness or apathy or any, and not all of them are necessarily spiritual. Some of them can be chemical or whatever. But what we're specifically talking about in this particular instance is we're talking about something that's spiritually rooted, that you no longer, you've basically taken what's glorious and you've devalued that in your mind. You've lessened the worth of that, and so that the effort that it takes to pursue it is no longer worth it in your mind. And the way to get over that is to really start to look at things and look at people when they display great characteristics, to really praise them and to not be jealous of them or to try to find some counterbalancing bad quality in them or anything, but to really wholeheartedly praise that and see it as good. And it's amazing how that will change your desire to embrace some of those good qualities yourself. You'll have enough desire to actually put effort into pursuing them. The story moves in Genesis chapters 4 through 9 from the personal or interpersonal to the societal or cultural. God creates categories. And those categories, there's a dual nature to those categories. Those categories bless and allow a place to live, but they can also be harsh, okay? And so I don't know if you've ever run into people who aren't Christians that are that look at the God of the Old Testament and find him to be a tyrant or something of that. Have you ever run into that?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
The same people often don't have the same contemptible view of, say, Jesus, but obviously, Jesus, from the foundation of existence, was always God,
right?
And so, in a very real sense, he is the God of the Old Testament,
right?
And so, I try to start there to kind of maybe peel the onion back a layer before going any further.
Yeah, anytime you have a category, you exclude. That's the nature of categories. That's what happens. They are exclusionary by nature. It's very easy to be upset by that. And I think that there's a tendency for us to look at stories in the Bible and think, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Maybe not in exactly the same way that the character does in the story in the Bible, but you probably will or have or maybe are even currently doing that. There's so many different categories that exclude me. All right, so when you were growing up, what did you want to do? What did you want to be?
A baseball player.
Baseball player. All right, so are you excluded from the category of baseball players?
To a significant extent, yes.
Now, did you use any kind of mental gymnastics to deal with the disappointment when you started to realize that it wasn't going to be in the cards for you?
Not really. I was the smallest kid growing up, so there was never a time where I had to realize it wasn't going to happen. I just kind of already knew it was not going to happen. So
I remember when I was playing football at our school, and I think that I wasn't getting very much time playing, and so it was in my mind. I was like, well, the coach has his favorites, and I'm really better than this guy, and but really those were all kind of examples of just two things, something very similar to Cain and Abel, but also something that's kind of similar to the flood, where you start to have to destroy. You're either going to destroy the person or you're going to destroy the category, and that's kind of what we have a tendency to do as people, is to destroy those categories. And you see that now there's all kinds of things really in our culture. The whole cultural moment is about the destruction of every category that can really be thought of. the categories of male and female, the categories of just anything that you can think of, healthy and unhealthy. I mean, there's really no category that you can possibly, even human and non-human, that category is being destroyed with people identifying as all kinds of different things. The obliteration of every category is kind of what's happening right now. And
we think people are finding categories to be like just restrictive and
sure.
prohibitive and
yeah, I'm a human being. I don't want to be a human being. I'm going to be a fox. And I don't mean like an 80s attractive person. I mean, have you ever seen students walking down the street and they have tails actually coming out?
I have not seen that.
Their
actually.
pants, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. I don't know how popular it still is, but for a while, this was something that was happening quite often. I saw it a lot as I would drive past McClintock over there, coming or going to church, and people be walking down the street, and out of their pants, the back of their pants, they would have some kind of like a tail coming out because they were some kind of animal. And you have furries, you have all kinds of people who are identifying as all kinds of things, inanimate objects, buildings, people who are marrying inanimate objects. You have all kinds of that going on right now. And what you have is the destruction of every category. The problem is that, there's a tendency for us all to say, oh, well, it's no big deal. Let them do whatever they want to. And that can go on for a while, but eventually what happens is that you end up destroying categories that are necessary for us to have a habitable place. And when you do that, then we'll find that life gets really bad really fast. Now the question is that finding ourselves in this culture, what do we do? And so I think that the problem that a lot of us experience as Christians is that we look to culture and we find a culture that we can't really wholeheartedly endorse. Do you ever turn on the TV and find things that you think, I don't know about this?
For sure.
Okay. And so as Christians, how do we deal with that?
That's a great question. Sometimes with great disappointment.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you think of the problem as being so large and beyond you that there's nothing you can do. But I think in the same way that it can start with one family and then spread to a society, I think you got to start there and just say, okay, well, it'll start with my family.
Mm-hmm. And when you say it'll start with my family, what do you how do you envision that? What do you?
I think there's an education that takes place, within the walls of the home and things of a sort, and I don't leave that education to someone else.
Okay.
I abject my responsibility there and stuff like that. But we're gonna talk about the world that God created, and if the spiritual is just imaginary, then categories are meaningless, and everything's meaningless at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So I know that your wife plays the guitar and does things like that. So have you ever considered as a family cultural creation of your own?
Cultural creation of our own. I think I need to explain this a little better. So how is this tied to my wife playing guitar?
Well, so the interesting thing is that we have a tendency in Christian circles to expect the non-Christian world to cater to us and to the things that we value. If there's no kids shows on TV that you think teach the kind of things that you want, sitting down with your kids and creating your own stories. C.S. Lewis actually, it's interesting that C.S. Lewis got his start with a world called boxing. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with that, actually.
Yeah, so him and his brother, they didn't have TV back then, and so what they did was they created a world of animals that were talking animals, and it was called boxing, and they created all kinds of stories and backgrounds, they had different characters. There was, people running for mayor of the town and, all this kind of stuff, and they just created all these stories, and that's actually how he got started. And later on, when the Chronicles of Narnia come around and you see these talking animals, those are directly from his time as a kid with him and his brother creating their own stories. That might be something that we have to consider. Obviously there's ways of, participating in a culture that's not founded in your faith and engaging with it critically so that it doesn't bring destruction to your belief system. But I also think that there's a way of creating your own culture, and I think that often that just never occurs to us.
I think it's definitely probably easier to consume culture than it is to create it as well.
Right. But I think that the value in creating culture is higher than the value in consuming culture. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.